So we're kind of southwest Missouri here. Yeah, we're specifically in the Stockton area.
Okay. I've done the I-75 route a lot. I've gotten stuck. I've had an accident in Kingdom City, and then last year I got stuck just on the other side of Columbia. I was hauling this guy's big living quarters trailer, and this place said you could pull in there, and it was in the dark. And I argued with her. I said, no, I don't think I should pull in there. And she goes, no, it's fine. You'll be good. And when I woke up in the morning, I was like, oh, crap, I should not have pulled in here. I ended up having to get a wrecker from the highway to come out, and it was brand new, too. Bill had just bought this trailer from Cimarron, and it's like a 45-foot, 25,000 pound. It was like Buck's old trailer, and this wrecker had to tow me out backwards, pulling the semi and the trailer.
Shoot!
And then the next time I went through there, I went. Let's see, you got 75, and then below that you have Is it 40? What's the one that cuts across the bottom of Missouri?
That sounds right. That sounds right. To be honest, we haven't gone that way much. We've only been here about a couple years, but
yeah. So I went across the bottom way, and that road was so skinny. And then I came up the border between Missouri and Kansas, and I stopped and stayed just south of Kansas City. There was a friend of mine that has a farrier school there, Heartland Farrier School.
Oh yeah, they're just south of us here.
Yeah, so I stayed right off the highway right there.
I gotcha.
I don't know how you do the summer in Missouri. That's so hot there.
So the first summer that we were here a couple years ago, it really wasn't bad. It was pretty mild, and yeah, man, we thought this was the deal because it rained a lot and we had green grass the whole summer, and it's quite a change from being a Kansas boy. So we were pretty happy about that. But last summer it was quite a bit hotter, and we've enjoyed it here. But I'm kind of looking for a cooler spot for the summer, I think.
Yeah. You have your sights on anywhere in particular?
Yeah, not in particular. We just kind of want a new adventure, really. Robin and I and my wife have always been, kind of passionate about just putting ourselves out there, and we want to do cool stuff with cool people. So we spent some time in Colorado before, and we love the mountains there. We've got some friends in California, so that could be an option. We're also kind of looking at overseas options too. We kind of want to do the Europe thing or UK. So if we could find a connection there where we'd still get to ride a lot, that could be an option as well. So mainly we want to spend some more time horseback with some cool people and some cool country. So
cool. Yeah, you sound a lot like me and my wife. We saw Italy was offering like $30,000 to move to some little town because they're losing the population. I don't know if that applies to American citizens, but we were going to look into that. You never know, right?
I know when we were visiting with Buck there at Ryan Branding, we were just talking about when Joe was there, he was saying Italy was kind of the deal. So that sounded like a pretty interesting option as well.
Yeah, I loved it. We just honeymooned there 2 months ago, and I loved it. It was a great country. And you could go out at night, and there's pizza everywhere. You can get the big Fiorentina steak. Thing's awesome. And I noticed out of all the European countries, because we kind of toured through a few of them, Italy is where they like cowboys the most. You get a lot of little chatter as you pass by a group of people. Like, oh, cowboy. So.
I see. Yeah. From what Buck was saying, it's like they rope a lot over there, and in certain places. So I think that could be a really cool deal.
Yeah, you bet.
At least part of the year, if not a year-round thing. Not opposed to splitting a year either. That could be super cool. So.
Yeah, could work.
Yeah. Winter in Missouri and summer in Italy. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah, the winters around here kind of hit or miss. So.
Yeah, might be the only couple on the planet that does that. But
yeah, who knows where life will take you?
Yeah.
My ideal situation would be somewhere super cool in the summer, but then Hawaii in the winter. So yeah, those guys that go over there and start a bunch of horses or something in the winter, I've always been envious of that. I think that sounds super cool. When I was growing up, my dad had video, Great Ranches of the West, and Parker Ranch was featured on there. And even when I was a little kid, I thought that was so cool there in Hawaii. So I'd love to experience that sometime.
Man, you might be the first cowboy that needs a private jet. I don't know if you could afford one, but you would need one.
I
all that
know.
travel.
It's one of those things where I think I could, really do that job well. I just ain't got the money. So
Yeah, that's like my dad was telling a story about my great grandmother, and apparently she always had this saying that good looks and money had ruined many a person, but she always felt like she could handle them both.
yeah, me too, for sure. Yeah, especially when I'm teamed up with my wife. I mean, she's my better half in every sense of the word. So
Yeah.
we do just fine on that.
So what do y'all do in Missouri now at the place you're on?
Well, mainly I'm a full-time braider. I have my braiding courses there with Be a Maker School. When we came, we had the opportunity to kind of be part-time with the place a little bit, and that worked really well. We got to tag a lot of calves and do a lot of fun stuff like that. We were riding a lot. But the place sold here a year or so ago, and it just hasn't been quite the same since. So
Sure.
I think that's kind of why we're looking to make a change there. But
Makes sense.
yeah.
So to get right to it, why rawhide braiding? Because most of the and you might correct me, most of the rawhide braiders I know are not in our generation.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. I think there's definitely becoming a younger group that's interested in the cowboy trades. As far as why rawhide, I'm not sure. When I was a little kid, I started braiding when I was about 6. I was always interested in braiding, and I'd asked my dad about it a few times. He's like, "Oh, we'll show you sometime." He didn't really braid much. He'd done just a little bit. He didn't have a lot of the tools or anything, but he had done a little bit. And he had the old Bruce Grant books, which is kind of where everybody started back then. And I kind of cornered him when he was out at the barn one day, and I was like, "When are you going to show me how to braid?" And he's like, "Well, get 3 pieces of baling twine." And so he showed me how to braid 3 strands right then, and ever since then, I was hooked. I braided everything growing up. Nothing in the house was left unbraided, kind of thing. As I got a little older, I was able to save my own money, and I got a string cutter, one I still have now, and I just love it. It's a great medium for me to express my artistic side through. I love the lines. I love the textures of it. It's I find a lot of beauty in it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I can see that you've obviously practiced quite a bit, because all the pictures I ever see of your stuff on social media, I'm like, holy crap. Like for me, that would be like sick, unethical torture to like sit there and like work on that like meticulously. And so, not to say I don't really appreciate the art, but man, every time I see that stuff, I'm like, I don't know how he does that and has the patience for that. It's so impressive to me.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think too, it's even when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a cowboy, and I think it just went right along with that. Riettas are especially what always fascinated me. I wanted a rietta in the worst way to rope with. I loved to rope when I was a kid, and I still do. And so that's really my favorite thing to braid, and what always kind of drew me in was the riettas. I kind of wore that chapter out in those old Bruce Grant books that my dad had, and so that's one of the first things that I tried to make when I was able to get my own string cutter and make some rawhide. So yeah, I think, just going with the cowboy lifestyle, and I love to rope, and, braiding my own rietta was kind of right in there with that. So that's kind of the journey there, I think.
So Scott, I'm totally naive to the history of rawhide braiding in terms of some of the names and stuff like that. So could you give us a little background on these guys that wrote the books, and kind of what piqued your interest, but ultimately, like, how far back have you studied? Like, are some of these guys that wrote books like ancient, or are these people that you could have met?
It's not as ancient as you might think. The Bruce Grant books, I'm not quite sure when he was alive and when that was really a thing. That would have been a little further back. The person that really got it going in this country and kind of took it to that level of maybe being seen more as an art form was Luis Ortega. And there's people out there that did know him, so I don't think that it was that far back. But there's been some more modern day braiders, if you will, that have kind of brought it more, or popularized it, I guess, and brought it more to the forefront. Guys like Brian Newbert and Bill Dorrance obviously was a rawhide braider, famous rawhide braider, and so I think those are the guys that were kind of some of the more influential ones. And then today, it's been elevated to where it's most definitely on the level of an art form, I think, and some really cool examples out there of where it can go. I really am inspired by the work coming out of Argentina. I think that's where some of the best braiders in the world have been for centuries, really. So.
So you had mentioned going other places, for example, with you and your wife.
Mm-hmm.
Is it kind of like how there's like cowboy culture everywhere? I know you just mentioned Argentina. Are there other places that are rawhide braiding hubs around the world?
That's the thing. I've thought a lot about that, actually, in terms of a move. I don't know, even in the United States here, I don't feel like there's anywhere that's really a hub. Unfortunately, I would love that if there were, but I think Argentina and Mexico, there can be places where it's much more common, especially among cowboys and vaqueros and that kind of thing. But around the world, you would be surprised the people. I check my analytics on my social media a lot just to see where people are from and where I'm getting my reach, and the people that join my courses as well. And it's really from all over the world, the interest in it. Regardless of whether they're interested enough to buy the tools and try to learn, they're definitely interested in it. And so I think it's kind of a worldwide thing. Has braiding stuff to sell. I've sent things to Czechoslovakia, lots of things to Australia and Germany, and places like that. So I think it's kind of a worldwide thing, but I don't know if there's really anywhere, unfortunately, where it's really a stronghold per se, although there are a lot of braiders in the United States.
Well, I guess in a way it is a little bit commercialized, right? Because if you go to the feed store and you buy like a Circle Y Bozal that's made out of that crap with the cardboard core, where's that stuff made? I mean, it looks factory made. Is that stuff coming from China or where?
I would say it could be some from China. I would say probably the majority of that's coming from Mexico. Yeah, I'd say Mexico, South America. Yeah, there is some of that really isn't too bad of quality, although most of the stuff that you're gonna be able to buy off a shelf like that isn't going to be the greatest quality. So,
yeah. So for the most part, everything you're doing is for like horse applications, right? Is there anything, any application for rawhide braiding that falls kind of outside of horsemanship?
For sure. Yeah, most of what I make, like you said, is horse gear, rietas or reins or hackamores or that kind of thing. But I also, I have a course that features kind of wearable stuff, scarf slides and bracelets, necklaces, that kind of thing. And that's really popular as well. I think that's, especially within the Western world, people who like the look of that kind of jewelry and wearable stuff, that's really becoming very popular as well. And so that's definitely a lot of popularity there. I see other examples like with leather braiding, doing purse handles even and stuff like that. So, and belts are a big thing, even if it's just an edging done on a belt or something to give it a kind of a cool look. There's definitely a lot of that stuff out there, and far from being dead. I think it's gaining popularity. So.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And then, so are you buying rawhide, or do you take it from the hide form, or even like live animal form all the way to a finished product?
Yeah, I'd say 97, 98% of what I'm doing is hide that I have made. I've skinned the animal and made that hide from scratch. However, if my hide supply gets thin and I don't have any hide for the projects I need to make, I will buy some. There's a few guys around the U.S. here that are making some good quality hides, and I'll buy from them. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. If a guy doesn't have access to it, as long as you're buying from good quality suppliers, there's nothing wrong with buying your hide. So,
Wow. So if you're making a riata, for instance, how much rawhide does it take? More than one animal?
it can. I've made a lot of ropes that it took 2 hides to make them, but you can make one. This latest rope that I've made, it came from all 1 hide. It just depends on the size of the animal more than anything. If you've got a big cow that was a pretty even thickness hide, you can get a whole riata out of that really easy. But if you have kind of, yearling steers or something like that, I made a lot of hides from those. It might take you 2 of them to, get all 4 strings for a riata out of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there any truth? I heard a theory once. I can't even remember what breed it was. I think it was like some sort of dairy cow, like Jersey cows or something.
Yeah.
Like the best riatas. Do you feel like that reigns true, or is that kind of a wives' tale?
So I've heard that myself, and I personally don't feel that that's necessarily true. I think it can be true. The thing about milk cows, in my experience, or dairy breeds, is those hides are usually thinner hides, even though those are big cows normally. And those hides are a very even thickness. And those 2 things can make it super easy to cut a good quality string because you don't have thick and thin places in the hides. So when you're cutting the string, you don't have to shave them down as much. And the smallest amount that you can shave those down gives you a higher quality string. So that certainly could be true, although it's not necessarily true because on beef cattle, there's certainly a lot of good string made from beef cattle hide. So,
gotcha. And so if you're talking about, actually skinning the animals and doing everything for a large majority of what you make, how did you go about setting up that supply line? Like, do you work with like an abattoir or a butcher, or like how do you set that up?
So for me, I was kind of fortunate because when we lived in Kansas, my dad worked for a commercial feedlot there, and so it was kind of easy for me to just get in with the manager and be like, "Hey, I need some hides. It'd be all right if I come skin some." And they've got deads and stuff like that all the time, so it was real easy for me to get hides, and usually those were really good quality hides because they would have thinner animals a lot of times. So that worked out really well. Since we've moved, I obviously don't have that supply, and it's been a bit more difficult. But I try to, keep up with the ranchers and stuff around, and just be like, hey, if you ever had to lose a cow or something like that, I'd love to come out and skin it. And a lot of times they're very, very easy to get along with on that. They love to see somebody utilizing that animal, that they didn't get to. So.
Oh yeah, I'm sure beats the heck out of burying the hide with the skid steer. I'm sure.
Yeah, it just helps it, break down faster, and it's kind of a win-win for everybody. So you just have to develop those relationships, I think.
So I know I'm very unknowledgeable about this, but the process of taking it from an animal hide to an actual rawhide product, are you actually tanning that hide? Or is a rawhide product essentially just kind of like cured leather that could, like if you got it wet and left it wet, it would rot again?
That's basically it. No, you don't. Rawhide is not tanned at all. It is basically the skin of the animal with the hair removed. That's kind of rawhide at its purest form. And there's a lot of different ways you can remove the hair. I personally like to use lime. So when I skin the animal, I will then take that hide and I'm going to wash it really good, try to get all the mud and the blood and stuff off of it. And then I'm going to put that hide in a barrel of water with hydrated lime. And in a couple days, that hair will start to slip off of that hide really easy. You just pull that hide out, push all the hair off, and then I'm going to put that in a vinegar and water solution, and I'll leave that soak for another day or 2 in there. And then you pull that hide out and stretch it in a frame. I just like to stretch them on a hay ring. That works real easy for me. And then, you just let that hide dry out, and you've got rawhide.
It's pretty cool. So
go ahead, Ben.
Well, I was just going to, so like in a daily routine for you? Because some people, when you have your own cottage industry and you work for yourself, sometimes that means that you work like 10 times more than anyone else. For you, how is your life doing that? Do you feel like you have time to do other stuff, or do you work like from sun up to sundown, just pushing on that stuff? Or does it kind of give you a chance to like work from home and be around your family and just have time to ride and do other stuff?
Yeah, it's definitely more that way now. When I first got married we got married in 2016, I think. In a couple of years, that first couple of years, all I did was ride client horses, starting colts and so forth. And then I went full-time braiding after that. And it was definitely that way. I had a hard time. I was brand new to really, setting a price for things that I had made with my hands. And I made a lot of mistakes. I really did. And I priced things too low, too conservatively. And I really struggled there for a while, trying to figure those things out of how to run a business. And I was running, as many hours a day as I could work, I was. And it burned me out, to be honest. But then one of the things that happened during that time, after I'd been doing it a couple of years, was I had a lot of people on my social media reaching out, like asking questions about my braiding and, well, how do you do this and so forth. And it was through that I was kind of like, I could just make a video and show them. And so I started doing that. I started filming videos, and that led to me then eventually putting those on Patreon to try to monetize them and to help people with their questions and so forth. And having then that evolved further into my braiding courses, but having that aside from just selling the things that I was making with my own two hands is really what's allowed me to kind of, live a life again and relax and kind of enjoy the art form again, and the teaching. I really love the teaching portion. That's become a real passion of mine. But yeah, there was a steep learning curve there, trying to learn how to run my own business in that way. A lot different than riding client horses. You charge $700 a month or whatever, and the more horses you ride, the more money that you could possibly make. So it's when you start making things with your hands and trying to sell them, it's a lot different ball game.
Yeah, maybe you weren't charging enough for those client horses either.
I wasn't. I was not. I was just trying to get the barn full.
Yeah. No, I can imagine there's a pretty steep learning curve there. Well, one observation right off the bat, talking with you, and don't let this go to your head, and I don't think it will. You're very well spoken, and you're articulate. Is that something that came about through doing your instructional videos and starting to have a presence online?
It certainly did. I wouldn't have been capable of having an interview like this when I first started out. I'd have been so nervous I couldn't have done it without stumbling over myself something terrible. But when I first started doing my Patreon page and my instructional videos back in the day, I started doing lives on Facebook because I wanted people to ask me questions about braiding. And so I started doing lives like once a month. I'd do them for an hour in an evening or something. And that was really where I think I started to get my voice and kind of get comfortable being on camera and doing that kind of thing. But yeah, it's been a learned habit. I have not always been this way. And honestly, I didn't want to be. It took a long time before I not only got comfortable with it, but to where I started to enjoy it and enjoy interacting with people and my students and kind of develop that love for teaching.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really noticeable. I think Joe and I both found from doing this podcast that when you see someone else doing any kind of presentation or talking skill, you kind of appreciate the effort that goes into it, because we practice that weekly now ourselves. And when I was scrolling through your Instagram a little bit, yeah, some of those videos where you're showing what you're doing, you can take it for granted. But like right now, we're talking to each other. This is pretty easy. I mean, yeah, it's not a big deal. But when you're talking to a camera, but you're talking to the camera as if like 100 people are watching you, that's kind of interesting. And now I noticed that. And so when I saw you doing that, you were very clear and very easy to understand. And Is that like, did you get feedback early on? Like your first couple of videos, did you feel like, I'm just always curious about that. Was like, did you get someone to hold the camera for you, or did you prop it up? Because that's one thing to make a video, but it's another thing to make a video and pretend like all those people are watching you and get a good message across, and make it feel really relaxed. Like you watch the video and you feel like Scott made this for you to learn how to braid, and he's talking to you in real time.
Yeah, well, thank you first of all. But yeah, when I first started to make videos, I'd have my wife film for me a lot, and but what I found worked the best for me after I got into it was I got a camera stand and I filmed myself, and then just edited the videos later, and that kind of helped my confidence because I could be alone rather than, even though you trust your wife and all that, I just prefer to be alone, and it was easier for me to start with. And so that kind of gave me some confidence as I was first getting going. Yeah. And then the other thing that did, kind of filming on my own and having a camera stand, was that I've always been super focused on getting my videos to where it's like me looking at the thing. I call it the Braider's eye view. I want people to be able to see exactly what I'm doing at every step of the process. If not like I'm looking at it, then like they're sitting in the chair beside me. And being able to have a camera stand there where you can move it and get it just so was key for that. So that was something else that I kind of found as I went along really was important for my video making process.
That's neat.
And you said originally you just had, like, you would do Facebook Lives and then Patreon videos, and you said that evolved into courses?
It did. So we were on Patreon there for a couple of years, and then several years ago, Nevada Miller started Be a Maker School, which is kind of a group of a lot of different instructors of Western trades, and she was putting them all on one platform, and we immediately wanted to get involved with that. That was a super cool thing to be involved with that group, and so we've never looked back. We put our videos into courses and went over there. And honestly, it's a lot better learning platform than what Patreon was. All the information is much more streamlined, and it's packaged with tools and resource lists and that kind of thing. So it's a very cool learning process that I wish I had had it when I first started out, because it would have shortened the process so much and really been a lot less frustration than there was when I was first learning. So
did that help you when you got into that, having to design a course? Did that deepen your understanding of braiding and the different things? Because we've talked to multiple people on here, and they've all described that once you have to not just maybe teach a one-off lesson, but really have a planned curriculum, like today we're going to do this, and then next week we're going to address that, and go through it. They really had to break down their craft to a level that maybe they had that level of understanding, but they never had to be that deliberate about it before.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, having to really break that down and, write the copy for every video and the tools and resource lists, it really just causes you to think about the entire process. And, even just filming the videos, going back to the previous question, having to think about how you are explaining something to someone so that they will be able to understand it. I feel like I've always kind of had somewhat of a knack at that, because I know what I needed to hear when I first was getting going. And that's the approach I've taken as I film videos, is how would I have best learned? And I think that, I've been able to achieve that, I think. And it definitely helps deepen your understanding for what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. What was, did you have like a big aha moment or a big takeaway or anything like that? Even if it wasn't maybe fun. So that, this is a really rambling question. Obviously we need more practice at this, but with rawhide braiding, Is it different where does making a Riata relate to making a Honda, which relates to making a Hackamore, or is it kind of like a base skill set and then they're all kind of their own thing after that? Like how does that work?
I think you're right. It's a base skill set. I feel like that's how I kind of laid out my first course. My first course that I ever made was Intro to Rawhide Braiding, and in that course, I kind of wanted it to be very skill based. So you learn all the things, right? You learn how to make hides, you learn how to cut string, you learn about all the tools and so forth. And once you know that, once you understand that, then making all the different making the different projects, they all have their own things. They all have their own details for sure. But if you've got those skills mastered, you can kind of make whatever you want to make. So, yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, because I wasn't sure if there were guys out there that maybe they're just Hackamore guys or something like that.
There are for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Do you feel like you have a specialty, or are you kind of an all-around braider? How would you describe yourself?
Well, I would say my most favorite thing to make are riatas. I love making riatas and Hondas. Probably, like I said before, I love to rope, and so that's what I really gravitate to. That's what always kind of drew me in. However, I make a lot of different things, mainly Hackamores, though. I make probably more Hackamores than I do anything else. It just seems like that's where you get the most orders. I think that kind of comes down to, the broad interest in horsemanship that's out there today. Everybody kind of wants a Hackamore, or they get a new horse, they want a Hackamore for it or whatever. So that's, they're very sellable, they're very marketable, and I think that's probably one reason why I get more orders for those than anything else. But I definitely, while I'm an all-around braider, I gravitate towards riatas more than anything else. However, as I progress in my career, I want to make more quirts and more reins and things like that, because those things they're more intricate, or they can be in a lot of ways, with the different buttons and things like that you can use, and size of string and so forth. And that's going to cause me to rise up and to become a better braider if I make those things and practice some more. So that's what I do want to pursue that going forward.
So I can see you've got some gear there behind you. I'm assuming you made that. Feel free to do some show and tell at some point if you want to. But I've got a question for you, kind of gear related. When it comes to bozals, and I don't know the measurements exactly, but some guys will make the noseband on the bozal smaller, maybe like an 8.5 inch. I don't know if I have the correct measurement, but basically what ends up happening is the bozal hanger will be riding right under the eyelids of the horse, and maybe even rubbing in the eyelids. And some guys make them longer. Like that's one example, and I'd love your take on that, if that's even ever been an issue for you, or how you build yours. But also, is there other little things like that where there's different styles, and then you kind of, as you get better at rawhide braiding, you start to develop certain standards that you want to uphold in your braiding that differ from maybe another guy, and it's based around usability first, and then maybe even style second. And anyone that sees your work goes, oh yeah, this is one of Scott's, because he would never make a bozal with a such and such a size noseband or whatnot.
Sure. Now, I think function has to come first, without a doubt, with anything that I make. However, being a custom braider, taking custom orders, you also have to kind of meet the buyer's expectations, or what their vision is, more than anything. You have to create their vision and bring it to life. And one of the things with that, you get people from all different walks of life, all different disciplines with their horse. Guys that are maybe more people that are more performance horse based, rein cow horse, that kind of thing. A lot of them prefer those Hackamores with the shorter nose button, and they'll end up tying that hanger back so that it doesn't interfere with the horse's eye, and they can kind of adjust it that way from horse to horse if they need to. I personally don't like to make my Hackamores that way. I will make them with a longer nose button so that hanger will sit down comfortably below the eye on my horses. but I'd say the majority of what I'm making is a shorter nose button for sure. But that really just depends on what the person is after, I think, more than anything. If they're comfortable having that tie back string on there, there's nothing wrong with that, I don't think. I don't like them myself. I'd personally rather not ride with one, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it. As far as, the reason they like those shorter nose buttons is they think that it's a quicker release because it changes the balance point on the hackamore and so forth. I don't know whether I agree with that or not, honestly. I think your horse can discern a lot of different feels, and so that's not for me to say. I try to create what the buyer is looking for, what the customer is looking for.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, that's interesting because not only are you, practicing art, but something like a bozal, right? That's a very particular device in horsemanship. Right. So understanding the mechanics, but then that makes sense. You got to make it to what your customer likes. Is there, so like with a bozal, for instance, besides the nose button, and I was saying that wrong. I was calling it the nose band. The nose button, besides doing it in a particular way, like if you were making one the way you wanted to make it, do you do the heel? And what do you call that part? I want to call it the heel knot. Is that correct? Do you make that knot special?
I don't. I'll just grab this one off the wall here that I've been working on.
Okay.
But yeah, this hackamore is one that I've been working on here recently. And yeah, so you get nose button and heel knot. That's one other thing I see real common. People, they would like the shorter nose button, and then they also want a larger heel knot, something that they think it's going to have more weight in it, and it's going to then be a quicker release to the horse when they drop their rein and so forth. There again, I personally don't care for one that is too large. I like them to be more balanced with the overall hackamore. This is a 1/2-inch hackamore, and I think that the size of this heel knot balances well with it. I don't want one that's going to be, really weighty. I don't like the way that they look necessarily. I just don't think that they balance very well in their appearance. And I also think that extra weight, when I'm trotting across the pasture, that thing's really bouncing that much more because it is so weighty. And so I don't care about that. I think it can make your horses dull to a point. But there again, those guys that maybe they're not riding as long during the day, performance horse guys, they're riding their horses for shorter increments, more intensive. And so that might be different for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what is inside of that heel knot that gives it the shape that you braid around?
So in my heel knots, I only ever use leather. One thing that you'll find people will use is tape, like electrical tape or something. After they put the two bars of the hackamore together in here, inside of this, they will just build this up with electrical tape or duct tape or something like that. I don't ever like to do that because when tape gets hot, if you leave it in your truck in the summertime or whatever, it melts. And eventually that will rot your strings in there from the inside out. So I only ever build this up with skirting leather. So there's nothing in there that's going to compromise the rawhide. A piece of rawhide gear or braided gear in general, if you keep it away from the, if you take care of it, you keep it conditioned, you keep it away from the mice and the dogs, it can last for generations. So I don't like to have anything inside my pieces that could possibly cause the strings to rot or to compromise their integrity.
Yeah, that seems like kind of a Hanyaker move to put electrical tape in there.
Yeah, pretty common for sure.
Yeah.
Can you just, for the people listening and for me, because I don't think if you held a gun to my head, I could tell you, can you talk about just from the very beginning, the process of making like a good quality hackamore? Like what are you braiding around and things like that?
Sure. So the first place that you're going to start with a hackamore is the core. And that just kind of depends on what you want it to feel like. If you want it to be more flexible, then I like to use a braided core. Usually a piece of a broken rietta or something works really well for that. And from there, if you want it to be stiffer, however, you can use a twisted core. That's going to make it much more springy. This one has a braided core in it, and it's kind of flexible, but yet it still has some spring. But this core was not used. It was a new core that I braided. Reata cores are going to be a little bit more flexible. But from there, you're going to determine whether you're going to use rawhide or leather for the base, for the body of the hackamore. This one is kangaroo leather. I personally really like kangaroo leather. I think it's a great material. I think it's, it's easy on your horses, and it's more all weather, so I really like it, especially on the bars. So you have the core, you're going to braid your body of your hackamore with your rawhide or leather strands. The next thing after that is put the nose button on. I build up a foundation of leather, again, just one piece, one thickness of kangaroo on there to then tie my button over. Once that is complete, then I put the base of that hackamore together like we were just talking about. And then I build that up with skirting leather, and I'll run that on the belt sander to get that to the shape that I want, make sure it's really symmetrical all the way around, everything's looking 100% right. And then you can tie that heel knot over it and finish your hackamore that way. So kind of the last thing I'll do is put the side buttons on and then put the hanger on.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't realize that that you could potentially use part of an old Reata to make your core. That's pretty cool, actually.
It is, yeah. One friend I have, he sent me he had a fairly new Randy Riemann Reata that he broke it almost right out halfway, unfortunately, so that was a real bummer. But I was like, why don't you send that thing to me? I'll use it for hackamore cores. So he did, and I used that for a long time, which is kind of cool. There's a whole bunch of hackamores out there that I've made that have got Randy Riemann Reatas for cores, so I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of busting a Reata, I know you can repair those, but could you repair something like that in the middle and then still go out and rope with it?
You could, for sure. That particular one, the strings were super thick on it, and it would have been pretty difficult to put that back together. However, I think it probably could have been done. But if you have a thinner strand rope, it's a little bit easier to take those apart and then reweave those strings together, unite them together like that, unite them together. But yeah, you definitely can piece them back together and then keep on using them. And I fixed a lot of ropes where they just break like one strand. Those are real easy to fix, and you can keep on using those for a long time.
How old were you when you made your first Reata?
Oh gosh, I must have been, I'd say 15 or 16 maybe.
And did you go rope with it right after
I did.
it was done?
Yeah.
Is that like a nerve-wracking experience to be like,
I don't know.
I just labored away on this thing, don't snap this Reata?
For me, actually, I'd never roped with a Reata until I finally made one, because I was poor. I couldn't buy one, so I had to make one. But actually, I don't know. I wasn't too worried when I finally did start using it, because I could just make another one at that point, right? So at that point, it's just kind of a dead cow because you already know how to make one. So
yeah. True.
Like Dave Weaver says, it's just a dead cow. So.
Yeah. That's true, though, what Joe said. That could have been kind of nerve-wracking because you're out there with your Reata. That reminds me of when I was poor and couldn't afford one. I wanted a truck bumper. So I welded a truck bumper, and it looked pretty sweet, I was really proud of it, and I welded the tow hooks on the front. And then wintertime came around, and somebody was in the ditch, and so I stopped to help him out. And so I hook up to him, and another guy stopped with his pickup. He goes, "Here, I'll throw a strap on the front of your pickup." And I was like, oh, crap. He's going to hook to that bumper that I built. And it looks really good. It looks really tough. But he's going to jerk it right off the front of my truck, and then I'm going to look like an idiot because everyone knows I made that thing. I hadn't really thought that through. But it worked out, and that was a pretty proud moment. And then you're telling everybody, I welded that thing on there myself. But up until that moment of truth, it would be like trying your own Reata out. I was waiting for that thing to come apart at the seams. Something like a Reata, I think we take it for granted because it's pretty commonplace. You throw a Bozal on your horse and you go to work, and you don't really think about what goes into it. But since this is your livelihood, I imagine you've studied the history of it a little bit. When the Bozal first kind of surfaced? Because you could have made all kinds of different things to put around the noseband of a horse and, ride them. But to come up with a rawhide braided, intricately made piece of gear like a Bozal is it's kind of interesting. So do you know where that first kind of arrived on the horse scene?
Well, obviously the Braider horse. I can't tell you when ago that that's where it would have originated from.
You got some hail or rain there?
We do. It's we were supposed to get some bad weather tonight, and I think it's arrived. So if you see me quick run out of the room with my drink here, then you'll know what happened. We've got to take cover. So
yeah, do you have tornadoes out there?
They said it's possible, but I think it was going to be more east of here. I think we're probably just getting a bunch of wind and rain out there now. But,
yeah, but no, we can hear you all right. And in the edit, we can they've got great tools for taking out background noise. But back to that thing about the Bozal, because for instance, like in horsemanship, if you study horsemanship, you study the guys like Ray and Tom, and you study your mentors, but you can still go in the writings and look back at guys like Boucher and Xenophon and people way back in history who were saying, hey, I think I figured out if you bend a horse this way and you build up this muscle and you do this, you can get this finished result. So I didn't know if maybe, you've read like some history books where some ancient pharaoh like developed some special kind of headgear or something. But even if you haven't, that's fine. But that is kind of interesting that they came up with that, right? Because it could have just been a piece of leather doubled over and tied around at the base. But I mean, you can sit there and look at, like I've looked at some Bill Black Bozals before for, a good hour, just looking at it. You're like trying to find the end of one of the little pieces of rawhide. Like, how did this son of a buck make this thing? So it's not even just kind of a good piece of gear. It's a beautiful piece of artwork, and you go throw it on a horse and ride it in the rain. And so the evolution of just that piece of gear, not to mention Hondas on the end of a rope, or your bridle reins, or, you go on and on, right? But just something that simple, you could have made that with a lot of things. And I know guys will say, well, it's like we were talking about a minute ago. It needs a certain weight so the release is faster and yada, yada, yada. But we kind of know, like, yeah, it does help. But if you have great hands, a lot of things can get by. You can, there's old pictures of Ray Hunt riding horses with a Tom Thumb snaffle bit. So it's not a grave sin. But at the same time, it is pretty cool that became a tradition, and now it's pretty commonplace. And a guy like you can make a living making those things for people, not as an art piece, but they're putting it on a horse and going to work with it. So it's pretty cool when you think about it.
It absolutely is. I mean, just braiding in general, the intricacies of who sat down and figured out how to tie these buttons. It's really quite something to think about, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, because like I said, I'll be sitting there looking at it, trying to find the end, thinking, how did they even make this? So yeah, who was the guy that even thought up making something that impossible? It's like the guy that invented the Rubik's Cube. Just way too much time on his hands.
Yeah. Must have been somewhere with long winters. That's all I can think.
You might have something there.
Yeah. So with the rawhide braiding, we talked about how it's so old. Have there been any big breakthroughs or anything like that in terms of, this, we talked about the nose button, but, someone said, this guy figured out how to make his Honda like this, and then it behaves like that. And, or is it more just kind of like an art form, and, well, maybe you could have a little more practical feature here. There's not like a big breakthrough that's happened in the last 20 years or something like that.
Not that recently, I don't think. I would say in the last 20, 30 years, it's really been kind of elevated, right? It's been taken more to a level of an art form than it was before. Although, back in the day, Ortega is the one who kind of started to take it that direction and started to use color and that kind of thing, which was definitely a breakthrough at the time. But a lot of those kind of, design engineering things that you mentioned, I've found through making stuff for a lot of different people that's so subjective. One person likes a Honda that is really lightweight. One other person likes a Honda that's got weight in it, and for whatever theory that they have. And so it just depends on the individual and what they're looking for.
Gotcha. Well, I know we've talked to some saddle makers, and they kind of have a similar philosophy. If you're doing custom work, right, you want to make your client happy.
Mm-hmm.
But do you have anything like I know, for example, Chaz Weldon, who we both love to death. There's a couple of things like you could call him up and say like, I want this on my saddle, and he might say, yes, sir, that's okay, we can do that. But internally, it would like drive him nuts, or like, oh, here we go, I got to do another one of these or something like that. Do you have anything like that where it's like, oh, someone wants me to braid this again? I don't know why people buy these things.
I'd say for me, it's probably the hackamores with the shorter nose buttons, like what we were talking about before. Some people really kind of want to take that to more of an extreme, and I really don't care for going there myself. But I don't have any problem making it for them if that's what they're looking for. But I don't see the benefits that they see sometimes in those things.
Is it less work for you? Do you have a shorter nose button?
Yeah, it takes less time because there's that many less spikes, that many less crosses that you have to braid in it. So it does take less time for sure.
And you might have said it already. What do you feel like is a good length for like the horses you ride? What nose button length do you usually make?
So for me, I like to start at 7 inches and go longer from there. I think 7 to sometimes even 8.5, depending on the horse. If he's a big horse and you're going to make a longer hackamore to accommodate him anyway, then his eye probably sets a bit further down, and therefore you need to lengthen that nose button out in order for it to fit him correctly, or what my perception of correctly is. And so, I think that those things just have to be adjusted to kind of fit the particular horse. But I think 7 inches, and what I mean by that is 7 inches on the leather foundation before I even tie the button over it. It will then finish probably 7.5, actually. So I think that that's a really good starting place for most horses out there.
Gotcha. That's valuable information.
Yeah. How long does it take you to make a hackamore from start to finish for the average size horse?
So I would say I'm probably 25, 30 hours in a typical hackamore with nothing too crazy done in it. So.
Okay. And then, so talking crazy, what's the longest it's taken you to make one?
I've probably got 50 hours in some that I've done.
Wow.
Those when you see those ones with a swelled nose button that have stripes all through the middle of the nose buttons, those take a lot longer. They'll take a lot longer to do, because after you finish the nose button, then you have to go back and put that colored string in there and fill in all the gaps. And then the same with the heel knot too. And you got to go and fill all that in with your colored string. And the size of the string, if it's really small string, takes a lot longer than larger string. And if there's pattern changes, I really like putting pattern changes in my nose button. Probably can't see it very well on this one, but you can see I've got some checkerboard in there. So it's a little bit different pattern. And those things can take a little bit longer as well. So those are some different options that you can do on one to kind of dress them up to your own taste a little bit, make it more interesting.
Oh, I mean, you clearly love what you do, but do you ever fall into, even with that, do you ever fall into a monotony where you kind of feel like you're at work and you're like, just got to get this thing done, and I'll be happy when it's done, but right now it's kind of boring just sitting here.
For sure.
Yeah,
absolutely. I definitely with the hackamores, like we keep going back to that, but like I said, I probably get more orders for those than anything else. And they definitely, after you make quite a few of them, it's kind of the same process over and over. And you got to find things to make it more interesting, and you got to keep trying to get better, and that keeps your mind more engaged with it, of course. But kind of making the same thing over and over the same way. Somebody will see a hackamore you just posted a picture of that, like, hey, I got this done, and then they're like, hey, can you make me one just like that? So you end up making a lot of the same thing, it seems like, and that can be monotonous without a doubt.
Yeah, no doubt. That's a lot like riding horses for folks, right? I mean, you start colts after colts, where when you're riding your own horse, You have time to kind of mess around and build little things in there, and you're thinking about the finished product and stuff like that. But what looks tedious to me is those Romal reins. I mean, all those little buttons, that's got to be a little bit tedious where you got to start over again. And then is it tough to, no, we're getting in the nitty gritty here, but it seems like braiding can't be that bad. Once you get going, you're just braiding away. But is it tough to start a braid and then end a braid?
So it just depends on what the particular one is. Nose buttons on hackamores, as an example, you've got probably 16 ends or so on those. Once it's all finished, you got to bury those, make them look like they were never there. And that can be really tedious and can be difficult to do. Beginning a nose button can be really difficult sometimes because you've got all those strings and you got to kind of cast them on to the foundation of the hackamore and take off going. So those kinds of things can be more difficult for sure. Kind of, the beginning and the ending, I would say.
And then, so when times do get monotonous and you're kind of just sitting there braiding away, do you listen to anything or put on a TV show or are you
I do.
A very concentrated person?
Yeah, I definitely like to have some music on or a podcast, that kind of stuff. There are times when I'll braid in silence. I kind of enjoy just being there with my own thoughts on the occasion, but by and large, I'm going to have some music or a podcast or something on.
Yeah.
So, again, like you said, we keep going back to hackamores, but I have more hackamore questions for you. So, like when I see people walking around with hackamores and they'll like hang them up in their tack room or hang them up in their trailer, sometimes they'll just hang the hackamore up. And then other times the hackamore will have like a wood block in it or something like that. And you mentioned earlier about the right ways to take care of a hackamore and keep it in good condition and things like that. What is kind of your regiment? What do you suggest to people when they buy something from you? Do you give them like a wooden block to go in the hackamore, or like why do people do that? I'm so curious about that.
So I don't provide a block with them when I sell them. However, I think that those are a good thing. When a hackamore is new, this one for example, it's going to be much more like this. It doesn't have any real shape to it. It's just kind of like a Y. But for it to fit a horse, you need to widen those bars out. The nose button's going to come together more and wider at the base, and that's what's going to fit a horse, more so. So those wooden blocks that people put in there are going to help shape them and get them to fit more like what a horse's nose is going to be. So I think that those are a really good thing. And when I would hang a hackamore up, I would like to have a block in it if I'm hanging it up with my Makati on it. If I'm going to leave it hang there for an extended period of time. You'll see guys also, they'll take their Makati off every time. Some of those things I think are more subjective to the climate that you live in. Guys that are in the desert, that might not be as necessary as people like who live where I live, where it's very humid. You may want to take your Makati off every time you use it, that kind of thing. So,
gotcha. And so if you're taking your Makati off when you use it, you feel like you don't necessarily need the wooden block?
But having that block on there would still be a good thing. It's just going to help that hackamore stay shaped, especially if, maybe it was damp from sweat or something when you took it off your horse. It's just going to help it stay shaped that much better and maintain its shape. So I think that they're a good maintenance tool.
Okay. So you would recommend a block for your hackamores?
I would, yeah. And you don't have to have a block if, you can buy those blocks from people that make them, but those are really nice for sure. If you don't have one of those, you can use a soup can. Really anything that you can, put in the base of this hackamore and use a piece of string to tie this up and it's going to widen out the base is going to work just fine. So I've used a lot of different things.
Oh, okay.
Big jars or big peach can or something like that. Those things are going to work just as well.
Okay. So it's more about keeping the bottom, the base of it stretched out than anything.
Yeah. You want to keep it from narrowing in and keep the nose button from widening out. You just want it to, fit a horse.
Sure.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So along those same lines, I know there is a group of people that like to untie their McCarty every time they use their bozal and tie it back, when they saddle up, and other guys who just leave it on there. Do you have a preference when it comes to that?
I think if you're using your hack more on a certain size horse, you're using it on the same horse where you don't have to adjust the number of wraps to make it fit, then I don't feel like there's anything wrong with leaving them tied. I'm also not very concerned about putting kinks in my hair rope either. So they'll get a kink in them and stay that way if you don't untie them every time. But if you're not very concerned about that, you're leaving them set for one horse or a particular size of horse, then I'm not very concerned. I'll just put that block in there when I hang them up. But yeah, if you are concerned about your hair rope getting a bunch of waves in it, or you're leaving them hanging up for a long period of time without being used, or you're in a very humid climate as well, like we are here in Missouri, then you may want to untie them.
Makes sense. What about I've seen hobbles made out of rawhide. I've never had a set, but I've had friends that have them. Do you make those, and do you have to do anything special with those to make them strong enough to actually hold a horse, or is rawhide just that durable?
So rawhide is a very strong material, and they definitely would be strong enough to hold a horse if they're made, of the appropriate size. If you see some that are real small or something like that, those might not be. You'll want them to be of a certain size of body to where that they're going to have strength in them, but they should be just fine. But really, I think if you're using rawhide hobbles on your horse, then that horse is already broke. He knows how to stand with hobbles on. You wouldn't really want to use them on a horse that doesn't know how to stand, and you'd be worried about the strength, because that rawhide can be kind of abrasive. If he were to really run off with him, it could kind of chew him up a little bit. So
makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's talk about another kind of maintenance topic that's always popular with people, because everyone seems to have their own kind of twist to it. What's your opinion on breaking in a riata and then riata maintenance? Because that always seems to be a hot button issue when people start talking about roping.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, everybody's always interested in that. That's a good question. So when I make a rope and I'm going to start using it straight away, I will put that rope up. Hopefully you got a good warm day to do this. I'm going to hang it up on the fence, just kind of hanging by its own weight. And then I'm going to put rawhide cream on there. Ray holes works very well. You can also make your own if you want to. But I'm going to get that rope greased up with that really well. And then I'm going to, after it's had a chance to sit there and that stuff to soak in and it get warm in the sun, I will take it to my log or my post that has holes in it. I like to have a log or a post that's got somewhere between 6 and 8 holes in it. And I'm going to run my riata through there and start pulling it. I'll pull it one way, and then I'll go to the other end and pull it back. Just take that rope as many trips as you need to, and as you're doing that and the rope gets more limber, you can work it up through more holes. When I do that, I like to keep it up off the ground if at all possible. I don't like to leave it on the ground to drag through rocks and little pebbles and stuff, because it'll grab those and that grease that I put on there and pull them up in your post, and then it scores your rope all the way down. So I like to have a couple guys to help me or whatever, and we work that rope back and forth through there without it ever touching the ground. And you can do that as many times as you want to get it to where you feel like you can handle the rope, because when you first make them, they're kind of like a slinky. They're kind of like a coiled spring, So you want to break them in enough to where you feel like you can handle them. You can build a loop and dolly, and you're not gonna cut your fingers off with them. So once you get that, get them as far along as you want them, you can just go straight to using them at that point. When a rope's fairly new, I like to dip them in the water tank when we go gather cows in the morning. If I'm going to be branding calves or something like that, I'll dip them in the water tank before we ride out. That rope has a chance to dry back, and then by the time we're ready to brand, it's got a little bit of moisture in it, and that's going to help it be more flexible, but also give it more strength rather than it just being dry. So that's kind of what I like to do. You don't really have to break them in at all. You could just go straight to using them. It's just a matter of whether you can handle their, that stiffness when you're first starting out.
And then over time, do you do anything to condition it? Say, like if at the end of a branding season or something like that?
Sure. So when those ropes when they're feeling real dry, like they've been used, and they're maybe even getting a little bit feathery, a little bit rough, excuse me, that's when you want to hang it back up on the fence and let it hang by its own weight, and I'll just grease it up again with some rawhide cream. And that's going to recondition it. It's going to put that moisture back in it, and that's how I will store them, and that's how I'll get them prepared for the next time I'm going to use them. So, like, we were there at Ryan Brands, you and I, last fall, and we did, I don't know, 300 and some calves, I think. And I conditioned my rope before we came, and I would condition it again then when I came home after doing that many calves. So,
Gotcha.
Yeah. But it just kind of depends. If you were out and it was kind of raining a little bit or something, that's going to help wash that rawhide cream off, that conditioner off of them. And so you may want to do it quicker than that. It just kind of depends on the weather a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And is that something too, like climate dependent in terms of humidity?
It can be, for sure. I think here, when it's more humid, it's easier to maintain them a little bit. If it's real arid where you are, or real dry, then they're probably going to dry out quite a bit faster. They're not going to have as much moisture content in them all the time like they will here. So it's really, it's one of those things. It sounds really complicated, but after you have one and you use it a little bit, it's really not. It's just kind of like your saddle. When your saddle starts feeling dry, you condition it. So it's about the same thing.
Sure.
So a little while ago in the interview, near the beginning, you were saying that this rawhide braiding is a good avenue for you to express your artistic abilities. So do you have any other artistic talents that aren't so widely known that you dabble at?
Well, that I'm good at, or that I
just dabble.
Yeah, dabble, appreciate, like to do in your spare time.
I really
play an instrument or anything.
I don't. There was a time when I kind of got into classical piano for a while, and I really enjoyed that. But unfortunately, I'm not good at it. But I really enjoy piano music and that kind of thing. But several years ago, I took up fly fishing. I haven't done as much since we've been here in Missouri, but I want to start doing it again. I really enjoyed doing that. That was also really interesting for me, picking up something that I never had done before. I'd fished, but I'd never fly fished, which is a whole nother animal. And, learning something from scratch that I'd never done, I think gave me more insight into maybe how braiding, or people that are interested in taking up braiding, would feel. So that was really interesting as well. But I took that up several years ago, and so I'm really interested in that. I just haven't had the opportunity to do it as much here lately. But other than that, I love to ride. I love to rope. I love to rope with regattas more than anything. But yeah, that's.
Have you ever tied any flies?
I haven't. That's one thing. I want to get into fly fishing, but I don't have a lot of interest in another handcraft like that. I am able to step away from those kinds of things when I go out the door to do my other hobbies, rather than having another thing with lots of little intricate parts. So,
yeah. I wasn't sure. I figured, like you said, you'd either be like, I don't need that in my life, or you'd be kind of naturally drawn to it the same way. So that makes sense, though.
Yeah.
It's not very. I can't imagine if it's too similar to work, it would be very decompressing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Can we talk about? I just want to hear briefly, kind of the evolution of your braiding. So you said you started, you had an interest at 6 years old, and then, at some point you were riding colts, and then went to a full-time braider, braided your first riata in your teenage years. Was it one of those things you just kind of always kept up with the braiding? And then what made you want to make that jump to, I want to be a professional at this?
It's definitely the thing that's always captured my interest the most. And so I've always been drawn to it that way. And when I wanted to make the leap to doing it full time, at that point, I really enjoyed doing it, but I also knew that I wasn't cut out to ride colts full time. I wanted to do something else, and the braiding was the next logical step. And so that's the direction that I went with it. And fortunately, it's worked out for me.
Cool.
Yeah.
And was it one of those things like you started doing that on the side and maybe sold some Hackamores while you still had colts, or did you just switch overnight? Like, what did that transition look like?
I kind of did end up switching overnight, actually, or close to it, because what happened, the place that we lived there in Kansas, I didn't have an indoor barn or anything, and I kept a full load of client horses all the time. And so that's very weather dependent for anybody that's done it or been around it. You know, if it really rains or something like that, that can really put you behind. And when you have a business like that, your expenses keep going because you're still feeding those horses, even though they're not getting rode and getting sent out the door. And one of the times that it actually rained there in Kansas, I was thinking about making the jump to being a full-time braider. I had been working on it on the side a little bit, but then one October, it just rained. It rained. We were in mud for a month. And so I kind of made a quick jump to just braiding. I braided, like 30 some Hondas, I think, that month, and really just kind of got after it, trying to pay the bills. And so then I still had some client horses that I rode for a little while after that, but more or less in the span of, a year, I made the jump there, and I was a full-time braider.
Wow. Well, it seems like it worked out. Maybe that rainstorm was meant to be.
Maybe so. The older I get, the more I'm starting to think that those things, everything happens for a reason, and things happen when they're supposed to happen. So,
you bet.
Yeah. I've been listening to now that Tucker Carlson's off of Fox, he's got a great podcast, and I've been listening to some of that. And he was saying that the other day. There's a lot of peace in that when you realize that, like, everything in your life, there's a reason for it. And frankly, you can think there isn't a reason for it, but it's going to happen anyway, because it did.
Yeah.
Because anything in your life that you know about already happened. So what are you going to do about it? So keep living, and it's probably a good thing. I was like, wow, yeah, that's a good point. Like, you can just be sad about everything that happened in your life or wonder about it, but it already happened. It's behind you. We don't think
Absolutely.
about that enough. But strictly from a business standpoint, how is the rawhide braiding business? Would you say there's a fair amount of competition, and is it pretty saturated, or would you say there's room for more braiders?
I think that there's room for everybody in almost any business, really. In my experience, I think braiding is a difficult business to be in full time. If you're doing it as a side thing or for your own enjoyment and just selling some stuff, then that's one thing that's going to be pretty easy for you to do. I think there's a huge and growing market for high quality handmade gear of all kinds. But I would say that being a full-time braider is still a pretty difficult thing to do. Mainly due, in my experience, to prices. I think that pricing has not increased with time. It has not maybe ever reflected the time and learning that goes into actually being able to create a piece. And that's something that I'm kind of focused on, trying to make a change or an impact on the industry and my own over the course of my career. I think about how can we get people to see themselves more as artists who have really put the time and effort into learning a craft, and then being able to get, a price for something where they're able to make a living. So those are the things that I'm thinking about with that right now.
Well, so that just brought up another thought. I had it earlier and I forgot, but we had a neat discussion with Kerry Schwartz a couple of episodes back, and we were talking about the difference between being an artist and being a craftsman. And we talked about different skills and different occupations where you can kind of be both and you can lean into one or the other. It seems like, from an outsider looking in on your craft, that you kind of got to be an artist. Like, it seems like your craft, and you could speak more to this because you not only braid, but now that you're starting your own course program, you could teach somebody to braid, but if they don't have kind of an artistic bone in their body, they might even turn out a piece of serviceable equipment, but it's not going to have the fit and finish that we kind of come to expect from rawhide gear, and they're probably going to have a hard time making it in the business. What are your thoughts on that? Kind of can you be a rawhide braider and just be a craftsman, or do you need to be an artist and a craftsman, or do you need to be one of those things first, if at all?
I think that depends on what you see your market as being. If you want to turn out gear that's very serviceable, straight, clean work that people are going to be able to go and use, and maybe you're okay with that, and you're okay just going the route of volume rather than fewer items, then that could be a great market for somebody. On the other hand, if you want to see yourself as an artist and always improving, always creating your next best piece every time you make something, then there can be a market for that if you put the time into it and really pursue it, I think.
Because with your courses in the teaching that you've done so far, are you getting pretty, I don't know, are you getting pretty quick feedback from your students, or are you just putting out information and you're helping people, but you don't really know how it's hitting? How do you get feedback from your students? And do you have kind of a vested interest in certain students and you kind of watch them grow and it helps you learn or helps you see things about the way people learn rawhide braiding from you, versus just putting out information and going, well, I know I'm doing a good job. I know I'm putting out enough information for somebody to be able to make rawhide gear. So, good luck, folks. What's that like for you?
Well, I have a vested interest in all of my students. One of the great things, or one of my favorite things about my courses with Be a Maker School is they're interactive. If you, at certain levels of the course that you get one-on-ones, either group Q&As, we do them here on a video call like we are now, or you can get one-on-ones depending on the levels that you choose. And that allows me to be directly involved with all of my students and see what they're working on and answer the questions that, something that they're having trouble with in the moment. And that is very fulfilling to me. I love doing that and meeting people where they're at and helping them learn and seeing their own love of the craft develop that way. And, we see people from kind of all walks of life. And that's another thing that I think is great for stewardship, preservation of the industry. But also, and is where we need to be going with the industry. I have one student now who is a mechanic. He's not in the Western lifestyle at all. And I've had a lot of those before. Guys, well, I'm a retired doctor from wherever or whatever. And they take it up as something that they were interested in. And that is exactly what I love to see. I love seeing everybody that's already in the Western industry, of course. But when we see those people who maybe you think of them as outliers, they're not involved in the Western life at all, but they see this, they see it as something that's accessible to them, and they're able to pick it up and run with it and have success, is what I really love to see.
Well, that's a very interesting observation, because looking at what you're doing with building a platform to teach your craft, I can't totally relate to it, but I can only relate my experience in the horsemanship world so far. And there's got to be some similarities there. And, like one example, for instance, someone who's been a real mentor to me and become a great friend is Bill Barnes, somebody Joe knows as well. And he was an orthopedic surgeon that randomly got interested in horses. And there's countless other people like that, and if you met them at a roping or in the arena, you would think they were just some cowboy from somewhere, till you got to know them better. Then you'd be like, what are you really? Right. But, no, but in all seriousness, so many people from different walks of life, way outside of, being born on a ranch, pick up these skills. And I think that's really awesome. And, I think that's great what you're doing. And like Joe hinted at earlier, and he was kind of asking you about, just the personal growth that you get out of it, to be able to show people stuff and then kind of rework different ideas you have maybe, or learn people's strengths and weaknesses. And, as you tailor your program to them, I'm sure you're constantly learning new tips yourself and new communication skills. And I just think that's so awesome, because without that, I mean, you're just a rawhide braider creating great gear, but you're doing more than that. You're giving back beyond that. And I hope that keeps going really well for you. I think that's really cool. Was that, did you think you were going to do that at the outset of going full time with rawhide braiding?
Not at all. No, there was one friend I had who was trying to get into braiding at the time, right when I went full time. And I would send him quick videos and stuff. He'd ask a question. I'd just be like, well, here, I'm working on it. So this is what I'm doing, just film him with my phone and whatever. And he even put that idea out there to me. He's like, oh, you should make videos like this. And I was like, I don't want to, again, I was camera shy. I did not want to be out there at all. My wife's the one who got me started on Instagram, because I was only on Facebook. I didn't really want to be out there. I just wanted to be able to make stuff and stay home. But yeah, it took off from there. So yeah, I love the term stewardship, and that's where it's gone to for me. My love of the cowboy lifestyle and being involved in Western craftsmanship and Western arts, I want to now be a steward of that and help it to be preserved and to go further. So that's what I'm really interested in right now.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
That's a great attitude. Everybody wants to be a part of something, but the best way to be a part of something is to participate and give something to the group, and then anybody can be a part of something. But if you just want to kind of be there and tag along, I don't know. You got to be really cool or look really good. But if you do something of value and you give back, of course you're going to be part of the group.
For sure.
So that's awesome. That's really cool.
Thank you.
So besides going to the maker school and taking all the Scott Gore courses, what do you recommend if someone wanted to get into braiding right now? Like, what would you say, hey, avoid doing this pitfall everyone makes, or you definitely need to do this. This is worth the time right up front to do this. What are your thoughts on that if someone's listening to this and they've been inspired to get into rawhide braiding?
Yeah, if somebody's interested in getting started, I would say the best place to start is, start following some people on social media. Like myself, I'm putting out short clips and videos, and that's going to show you a lot of stuff right there. It's going to let you see the tools that I'm using, the way I go about making things, and you'll be able to see more, whether it's for you or not, or if it's something that you're really interested in pursuing. Kind of like me when I first started fly fishing, and especially now because I never got very good at it, is I just watch videos on YouTube. And so that shows you a lot of stuff. And in the braiding world, I think people like myself or whoever that are putting out videos like that are you can see kind of some stuff, see what they're working on, and then that leads you to getting some string and starting to tie buttons and hopefully taking a course or going somewhere in person or whatever that looks like to get into the craft. So
yeah, The other thing, I found this really interesting when we talked to Chaz Weldon about it, because he had opinions on folks getting into saddle making and making the jump to full time saddle making. And so the example he gave was that he didn't think you should make the jump to full time unless you could make a rough out saddle in about 40 hours. And if you couldn't make a rough out saddle in 40 hours, it was just going to be hard to make ends meet. And I was curious if you had any thoughts on that related to braiding, any sort of metrics like, if it were me, I would want to get to this milestone or this checkpoint before I quit my day job, sort of thing.
Man, that's so hard to say. For braiders, braiding is such an involved thing as far as being able, just the learning curve of it, right? You've got the tempering of the hide, getting that right, the moisture content before you can work and so forth. So that's really where you want to start. You want to get to where you are proficient with those things, where you can get a piece of hide out, temper it up, and cut a string, and then braid something without having to go back and start it over too many times. I think that definitely for me, when you're first learning, I would like, well, I want to braid a Honda. And I'd have to cut several pieces of hide before I could actually get the string made to then actually braid the Honda. But you reach a point in there where you kind of understand that part, right? You're efficient with that. You can pull a piece of hide out, cut the strings, and braid the Honda, and it's not a big deal. And so you want to get to that level of, comfortability before you would try to start a business, I think. But yeah, it's not as big of a learning curve as people think. It's again, it's kind of like roping with a riata. Once you get into it, it's not that big a deal. It's just there's just a lot of little things that you pick up as you go along.
That makes sense. I had one other question I wanted to ask you. I can't remember. Well, with that question, you alluded to making prices for your work. So is that part of the deal that's so tough, right? Because you just mentioned how you gave a metric, but Chaz, for him, and he's been doing it a long time, it was so calculated. Like this many hours, this product, and make it. And like I'm sure, like every saddle maker's got a price for a base rough out. But you mentioned the pricing deal. Is there any sort of, and you don't need to use exact numbers, I'm not trying to get into your business, but is there any sort of metric you used there where it was like, this is what I need to be making an hour maybe, or this is what I need to get out of this piece because I know it takes this much time? And then is that subject to change because, this ended up being way more intricate than I anticipated and it took more time? Like, it seems like that would be something that you really have to grapple with at the beginning. Because like you said, a lot of people, when they start a business, whether you're starting colts or doing whatever, you tend to undercharge.
For sure. Well, let's use a Honda just as a kind of a basic example. Everybody's going to have a number that they need to be at for what they have to make per hour in order to be able to keep the lights on. That depends on how many hours a day they're willing to work, how many hours a day they're realistically actually going to be able to work. Working from home is a whole different animal than actually going to a job every day. It just is. When you're home, no matter how hard you try or how disciplined you can be, you're always going to have, one of your kids is sick, or you got to take the dog to the vet, or whatever it is. So there's all those things that kind of go into determining how many hours you can really have and how much per hour you're going to have to be able to make it. But that was so true for me that I drastically undershot the number that I needed to be at in order to make it. And using the Honda as an example, by the time I make a Honda and put it on the website and communicate with the buyer if there was any, and take the payment and get it sold, whatever, get it shipped, get the shipping label made. There's going to be an hour and a half or more in that Honda, at least, probably an hour and 45 minutes by the time it's in the mail on the way to the buyer. And that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it's real common to see a Honda out there for $50. And when you really back into that $50, back into how much money you made there, you got, let's just call it 2 hours worth of work, minus your payment fees, your platform fees, minus your website, minus any materials, whether you bought that hide or you spent time making it. I put leather pull tabs on my Hondas. Those come at a cost. All these things add up. And when you really put the pencil to it and put everything in, you'll realize that there wasn't much money made there for $50. So for 2 hours worth of work, that is. So that's the kind of thing that you really have to dig into for your particular business and decide where you need to be at in order to make it, I think, in my experience.
Sure. Makes sense.
So, Scott, maybe you've already done it, but do you have plans to do any in-person workshops?
I definitely want to do some. I do offer an in-person option through my courses at Be a Maker School, but I definitely want to do some workshops. Like we talked about earlier, my wife and I love to travel and do that kind of stuff, and so that's something I definitely would be interested in, is doing some workshops around the world or something like that, trying to, if there's a group in Europe or somewhere that wants to do one, I think that'd be super cool. Or a group around the United States or whatever. So I love teaching, and I really like the in-person aspect as well. The video calls are really cool. I love doing that, but there's definitely something about in-person that's super awesome.
Yeah. Are there trade shows that you hit regularly?
Honestly, I really haven't gone to a lot of trade shows. The way that I have done business is I just market through social media and now my website. I really haven't ever gone and done the trade show thing. I always kind of wanted to do that, but when I was really making a lot of items, I was pretty hand to mouth. I would make them and I'd have to sell it. I can't hold them until we go to a show or something like that. So I never ended up going to any, but I definitely would like to get to some here in the future.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. Well, I guess my last question for you is, are you related to Al Gore?
No. I never heard that one before.
Yeah, I like to throw a
No, as a
ball
matter
every
of
now and
fact, we were going through the Kansas City airport one time, and I was giving the guy my boarding pass, and he was like, "Oh, your cousin was here just a half hour ago." No, fortunately not.
It could make for a lively Thanksgiving dinner, I imagine.
Yeah, well, you never know. I was probably a fascinating conversationalist. So
probably, yeah. Next on the move. But
there you go.
Scott, could you tell everybody listening where they can find you on social media and also your website?
So I'm Scott Gore Rawhide on all my social media. Right now we're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. My website, scottgorerawhide.com.
Guys, you should really go check that out. That was pretty cool. Joe shared that with me, and I was scrolling through it this afternoon, and you got a lot of cool stuff on there. So
thank you.
I'm sure people will go follow that. There's going to be a whole new crop of rawhide braiders cropping up here, at least a dozen or so of our listeners probably be interested in that.
Yeah.
I hope so. I think the more the merrier.
Yeah. Oh, my last question is, Scott, when you are working hard on all these projects, what are your favorite podcasts to listen to?
Let's see. Well, on the move, of course, is number one.
Right. That's what I thought.
But lately, I've been listening. This is a kind of a weird thing about me, I guess, but I have started listening to the Country House podcast.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, which is several guys from the UK that they talk about country houses, like country estates over there. And I found myself really kind of enthralled with that. I love hearing what they talk about, because behind that, I think that culture is kind of an underlying stewardship there, to maintain those houses for hundreds of years. And hearing the intricacies of how those houses were built and why they were built a certain way and the way the estates have been maintained. I just find that so fascinating. Yeah. And the people that have been there for centuries, multi-generation, just maintaining the land, being a steward. So I really love that and find it very fascinating.
That's cool.
That's
cool.
That is the thing that struck me the most about being over there. And you summed it up, the word heritage. I remember we were sitting in Switzerland on the train, and it had slowed down for a minute. And I looked out the window, and we're up there in the middle of nowhere. We were kind of like between Zermatt and somewhere else. And there was a little sheep like shed right there beside the train track. And every single end of the log had like little notches in it. And somebody had painted the little notch. I mean, this notch was a half inch, and they had probably 200 notches up the side. Every little notch had a little yellow paint in it. The door had hand carving. The entire roof was slate, but it looks like rock. It's massive.
Yeah.
There was a few other little intricate details, but I was like, wow, like that's a little animal shed up in the mountains. And somebody took their pocket knife and carved, and it's probably been there for over 100 years. And you don't see that here, right? Folks here go get a steel building from down the road, and in 10 years, it's already rusting out. And so,
I think the best things in life, I think the best things in life are made by hand.
Yeah.
So that's a culture that I'd love to be immersed in sometime.
Yeah. I could see that. Well, if you make it over there, and if we make it over there, we'll have to meet up. We could be a couple of American cowboys in Europe. But
that sounds good to me.
If you get there first, let us know. We'll do a live from Europe podcast.
There we go. Sounds like a plan.
All right, man. Well, hey, don't hang up. I'm going to hit end, and then your thing's got to upload, so you don't want to hang up yet.
Okay, perfect.
Sweet.